My name is Randy Braham, Director of the Jack Eisner Institute for Holocaust Studies. Today's lecture is a special one indeed, titled Contemporary Reviews of the Holocaust Through the Eyes of a Survivor. This lecture is part of a series offered as public service by the Institute under the auspices of the Graduate Center of the City University in New York. The Institute has been established through a generous grant from the Holocaust Survivors Memorial Foundation. Today's lecture is as special as is today's speaker. He is Mr. Jack P. Eisner, the benefactor and founder of the Institute. As you all know, he is the author of a bestseller, The Survivor, published by William Morrow and Company. The book will soon be published in paperback by Bantam Books. The book is an international bestseller, as I said before, and has been published in 14 countries. He is presently working on a new book based on the heroic rebellion at the death camp at Sobibor. Mr. Eisner is the founder and vice president of the Warsaw Ghetto Resistance Organization. He is the founder and president of the Holocaust Survivors Memorial Foundation and is also the chairman of the Encyclopedia of Polish and East European Jewry, presently in preparation. In addition to all of these major contributions to the documentation of the Holocaust, I am especially proud that Mr. Eisner selected the Graduate Center of the City University of New York for the establishment of a special institute bearing his name, devoted to Holocaust studies. In connection with the Graduate Center, I must also mention that it was Mr. Eisner who originated the idea to investigate and study the attitude and reaction of the American Jewish community and of its leaders during the war, to assure an impartial study of this very controversial subject. He provided for the establishment of a special commission, a commission headed by Justice Arthur Goldberg. The presence of Justice Goldberg and other prominent Americans on this commission will assure, I'm convinced, the objectivity of the study and bring to light the attitude of the American Jews during the Nazi period. Without taking any more time, let me remind you that today's lecture is titled Contemporary Reviews of the Holocaust Through the Eyes of a Survivor. Mr. Jack Eisner.
Thank you very much, Professor Braham. Ladies and gentlemen, it is indeed a pleasure, and I'm very delighted to address you tonight, my first such appearance at this institute. You have had many, many eloquent, illustrious speakers in the last 2.5 years before me, and I'm quite certain that under the able leadership of Professor Braham, many more eloquent and internationally renowned experts in this field will appear here again in the future. Some 3 years ago almost, I decided to dispose of all my business interests and to devote the rest of my life into the educating and enlightening society, Jewish people and non-Jews, through lectures, through writing, producing films, organizing symposiums, conferences on the subject of the Holocaust. And you may ask why. What for? To shed more tears on that event, that cataclysm? Not at all. We Jews have ample opportunity all year round to shed tears. Now Kaddish prayers, now Easter remembrance prayers, and once a year at the annual commemorations on the anniversary of the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising. In fact, the next one is only a month from now, the 18th, in Temple of Emmanuel, where I'm one of the organizers. It is right then and there we can remember and shed tears for those millions that perished, so many of my own family. But my efforts, my mission is to enlighten mankind to the best of my ability about the meaning of that event for the present and the future generations. The implications, the lessons, the message. And that's, on that subject, and that theme is what I would like, and I chose to address you tonight. The Holocaust through contemporary eyes of a survivor. Two unprecedented events in the early 1940s have changed the course of human history. The atom bomb on one hand, and the Holocaust. Both were true mutations, yet the Holocaust is the greater, in my view, and more likely peril to mankind. Its implications and consequences are enormous. It has changed forever the relationship of man to man. It has changed the relationship of Gentile to Jew. It introduced the specter of mass national insanity. It elevated genocide to an ideology, a name, a policy, not a consequence or an instrument of policy. It has confirmed that man is neither good or bad. He's both good and bad, depending on the circumstances, and most important of all, it introduced the idea and gave the example that the fastest way to restructure, to remake, to beautify, as they called it, the human race, is through death factories. Is the Holocaust just another tragic example of bestiality, brutality, and genocide? Or was the annihilation of 6 million Jewish men and women and children a unique phenomenon? Can it happen again? Can it happen to non-Jews as well? What are the implications, the lessons, the conclusions for the present and future generations? For more than 35 years since my liberation from Nazi slavery, I have watched in amazement and dismay how the world, the media, and even some academic circles have distorted that cataclysm. Mankind has as yet, more than 35 years after the event, not began to grasp its immense importance for Jew and Gentile. The Holocaust is so very complicated and horrifying an event that it took mankind more than 35 years even to begin debating it. It is only recently, since the late 1970s, that the new generation is courageous enough to inquire, how was it possible? I was born in Warsaw, where almost 500,000 Jewish people dwelt among 2 million Gentiles. I was raised in a middle-class, traditionally Jewish family, and I remember, as a boy of 12, in the late 1930s, sitting in my small room, contemplating, meditating. Yes, I'm so lucky, very lucky. I used to talk to myself that I wasn't born into those dark ages, the 8th or 10th or 12th century. How fortunate I am that I was born into the 20th century, that age of science, of technology, of humanistics, this century of progress. Yes, I considered myself lucky and innocent, for I did not know Auschwitz. But my children, and you children, and the generations to come will never, ever be as innocent. Civilization can never be as innocent. Since from now on, we know of names like Auschwitz and Treblinka and Dachau. With the Holocaust, the relationship of man to man has radically changed forever. For 5,000 years of recorded civilization, that relationship at its worst had always been one of exploitation, subjugation, domination. We conquered in order to exploit one another economically, militarily, geographically. We conquered for national, racial, or religious reasons. Yes, we killed generously all through the ages. If Yuan didn't allow himself to be dominated, converted, exploited, or enslaved. But in the Holocaust, for the first time in our history and the history of mankind, I, the 13-year-old Jewish boy, could not exclaim even if I wanted to, I shall convert. What do you want me to become? A Catholic, a Muslim, anything. Just let me breathe, let me live. No such choice. I could not exclaim even if I wanted to, I'll accept slavery. Just let me live. Maybe my grandchildren will one day be free. Great-grandchildren. No such choice. I could not, of course, flee to another country or continent, as was the case so often through Jewish history in 2,000 years of diaspora. The choice was always there, convert or be expelled. In the Holocaust, I had none. I was condemned to perish without recourse. I had no choice whatsoever. That is a new phenomenon, a new relationship of man to man. I was condemned not for what I did, not even for what I was, but for what my grandparents were through hereditary guilt. In my own backyard in Warsaw, one of my best friends was a teenage Catholic boy. Often when he used to get angry at me, he would call me a dirty Jew. But when the Nazis occupied Warsaw, they promptly discovered in the city archives that his grandfather, 65 years earlier, converted from Judaism. And so he and his entire family were pronounced Jewish. They had to move it into the ghetto and subsequently perished in one of those death camps. In sum, the Holocaust was not just discrimination or persecution. The Nazi philosophy transcended anything we had known before or humanity had ever experienced. The truth of the Holocaust and what the Nazi philosophy aimed at was the restructuring of mankind, the remaking of the human race through killing through death factors. The Germans called it beautification of the human race, not through vitamins or education, but through killing. The Jew, Western civilization's traditional scapegoat, was only its first victim. Had Nazi Germany been victorious, the gas chambers and crematoria would still be working full blast on tens of millions of non-Jews. With the advent of the Holocaust, a new philosophy that governs the relationship of man to man has been established. We not only annihilate those who oppose us, genocide itself has now become an objective, a goal of human endeavor and behavior, and not a consequence of it. That is a cardinal, radical departure. Myths about the Holocaust. Among the most infuriating things to a survivor are the myths that have been perpetrated about this unique man-made catastrophe. First, there is the myth that a few hundred, or at most a few thousand evil Germans were responsible for this immense slaughter, including more than 1 million infants and children. No one who was there, as I was for 6 long years, could possibly believe that the systematic annihilation of millions could be carried out without the complicity of many millions and the participation or criminal acquiescence of virtually the entire population of 70 million people. In a sense, what really happened, a nation went insane, accepting a program of the elimination of entire races and sections of mankind. In this age of mass communication and mass psychology, and it will be even more true in the 21st century, the ability of psychotic leaders to lead millions into mass insanity represents a new and difficult kind of threat to human survival. If such mass insanity could occur among 70 million Germans, could it not happen among 60 million Frenchmen or 225 million Americans? It is of secondary importance for me to stand before you in 1982 and accuse the German generation of the 1930s, 1940s. That is secondary. The significance of that a nation can go as insane as one individual is universal and is news to civilization. This revelation is certainly new to civilization. The Holocaust has acquainted us with the first encounter of voluntary mass insanity. The chances and conditions for that new phenomena are growing and expanding. The Nazi philosophy is not dead. Nazism is alive. We destroyed Nazi Germany's military might, but with a gun. One cannot destroy an ideology, especially one that has been so enthusiastically and wholeheartedly embraced by tens of millions of people so recently. And so Nazism is slowly but definitely emerging in many countries around the world. The Nazi theory can easily be adopted by any fanatical nation, race, or society claiming its superiority, not necessarily racial, but perhaps divine, or technical rationalizations, or simply for nationalistic or economic reasons, are then proceeding with the restructuring of the human race through mass murder. The example set by the Germans, a leading Western nation. The Holocaust is indeed a terribly serious and dangerous event for mankind, and not only for Jews. Another myth is that millions of Jewish people did not resist. It is assumed that the millions went passively to their slaughter. The question is always asked in a negative manner. Why didn't those millions resist? I'm never asked, tell us, you were there. Did they resist? Always in a negative way phrased. The truth is that most fought back valiantly and courageously, heroically as any people or nation would under similar circumstances. It's precisely those circumstances that the media has failed to portray adequately and accurately. Organized warfare was waged against us. Nothing was improvised by the Germans. Everything was planned. Hundreds of Nazi officials and psychiatrists were sitting in Berlin, in Frankfurt, and in Hamburg planning our destruction. First spiritually, then morally, then through hunger and disease, and at the very, very last, through physical annihilation. The resistance took many forms. And who's to say what form of resistance was more courageous? Is it mine? Because at the age of 15 I confronted the German tank with a Molotov bottle in the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising of April 1943? Or perhaps my father, yes, my dad, who all through those years insisted that I shall never degenerate to become a barbarian like they are. He believed in a sane and ethical world. On his last journey, on the way to the gas chambers, in that inferno of a cattle car, and I was there and watched this man in amazement, how he still managed to hide one of his favorite books and squeezed his way through the crowd to that little opening where the moon was shining in through the window, so that he could still study another few pages of Spinoza's Ethics. For he wanted to preserve his sanity in his world of order to the last moment of his breath. Perhaps my father was more courageous and heroic in his resisting barbarism than I was. Or was Halina, that 15-year-old teenager, more courageous when she silenced half a dozen stormtroopers with her last and only grenade, exclaiming in ecstasy, "My God, their blood is as red as ours"? Yes, we didn't know. For we Jewish boys and girls were brainwashed every hour, every day, every week, every month, every year, that we are inferior, not worthy of crawling on this earth, more worthless than rats. And we didn't know whether that so-called master race, the Superman, they could bleed as we did. Can they have pain or hurt like we do? Or is perhaps that Jewish mother, yes, that Jewish mother whom I was seen in the front of the gas chambers refusing life when it was offered to her, is she more heroic when she insisted, if my little girl will walk in there, I follow her? And she did. And let no one ever dare to imagine how he or she would behave in front of a gas chamber. To me, that mother is the ultimate of courage. For it takes more, much more, to refuse life than to throw a hand grenade. What about my grandma? Yes, my Bobby Mashe. Was she courageous? Did she resist? All I can tell you is that she saved my life. At the age of 70, she went to her death with her Bible in her hands and with a smile on her face. For she outsmarted those Nazis. She saved the last of her 20 grandchildren, hiding him beneath her old Victorian bed. Yes, courage and resistance takes many forms, and each resisted in his own way. Another misleading idea frequently advanced by those in the public eye is the conclusion that our concept of the Holocaust should embrace several million non-Jewish civilians who perished at the hand of the Nazis, along with those 6 million Jewish people. No one can deny that there were millions of non-Jewish victims, especially, least of all I, who lived, suffered, shared, and witnessed the starvation and slaughter of thousands of non-Jews in Majdanek, of Flossenbürg, and Dachau, and so on. Yet there was a crucial difference. They were not part of a race targeted for total extermination. And that is the real meaning of the Holocaust. Yes, millions of non-Jewish Frenchmen, Poles, and Russians, and Yugoslavs, Dutch and Greeks and Czechs, and even some Germans perished in those Nazi camps. We must never forget their memory. Their struggle and death was a consequence of their refusal to submit to the Nazi philosophy of domination, exploitation, and subjugation. They fought back against tyrants who planned to enslave them and relegate them to second-class citizens, inferior human beings. Their heroism was yet another example of valiant resistance against tyranny that has recurred through the ages and always has been a part of man's relationship to man. Their deaths were the consequence of their behavior. Had they behaved in conformity with their adversaries' design, those concentration camps would have been empty of all except the Jews. Only the Jews had no choice whatsoever to escape punishment and annihilation. Only the Jews were subjected to this new philosophy of genocide, at first in human behavior. Only the Jews were the victims without recourse, debate, or appeal. Many of the non-Jewish victims were incarcerated in concentration camps, yes, subjected to inhuman treatment. Yet at least 30 or 40% of those survived. In fact, those Jews who were lucky and were sent to concentration camps had a rate of survival similar of that of the non-Jews. Today's thousands of Jewish survivors of the Holocaust, most of them are former inmates of these camps, Auschwitz and Flossenbürg and Dachau and Buchenwald and Bergen-Belsen. However, there are hardly any survivors at all of the Nazi death camps, like Sobibor, Treblinka, Belzec, Chelmno, or Birkenau, built especially for the annihilation of Jewish people. Those insisting that the non-Jewish victims of Nazi oppression were also targets of the Holocaust are completely ignorant of the significance of this event, its uniqueness, and its lessons for mankind's future. The basic and fundamental reason to punish the Jew and non-Jew were profoundly different. Obviously, the consequences were and had to be different radically as well. In my last concentration camp, Flossenbürg, I became very friendly with a Polish teenager, a stanch Catholic. He found himself there because he refused to obey the Nazi German demand for forced labor. We became pals and were liberated on the same day, April 23rd, 1945, by the victorious American troops and tanks, while we were on a death march somewhere on the side roads in the Bavarian hills. We both were young, aggressive, and regained our physical health and strength within months. Since both of us were born in Warsaw, we set out on foot, hitchhiking, on military vehicles wherever possible, hanging on to speeding locomotives or on rail car roofs to our hometown, 1,500 kilometers east of where destiny found us liberated. In a post-war Warsaw, decimated and nearly destroyed, my non-Jewish friend promptly found his family and friends. Yes, the house he last lived in was destroyed by the retreating German army during the brave September 1944 general uprising. His father was arrested and deported to Auschwitz, where he perished. Yet most of all that he remembered and loved was still there to greet him with enthusiasm. I watched as he hugged and embraced his grandma, stroked with joy the now old and pouchy Irish setter he remembered so well, smiled broadly gazing over the pages of his family album, hugging and kissing his younger cousins, exchanging greetings and kicking a soccer ball with an old school friend. He even stared with nostalgia at his old worn-out sweater that he tried on again after a 3-year absence. My non-Jewish friend came home with scars, of course. He found his family and friends war-torn but alive. With hope and laughter was their reunion. I too came home to Warsaw, my hometown, but I was greeted by no one, received with silence, and found nothing, no one that I loved, remembered, or cherished. My grandma Masha had 20 grandchildren. My grandma Hannah had 11. 31 cousins and all, boys and girls. Some were blonde, some brunette, some redhead, smiling, crying, hoping to grow up. Their ages were 2 to 12 when I left them. When I returned, not one of them was there alive to greet me, to hug me. I alone of 31 survived. That reality was even beyond my non-Jewish friend's capacity to comprehend. My entire world of happiness, love, nostalgia was absolutely, completely destroyed, not by accident or improvisation or through emotional outbursts, by an organized, methodical plan to eliminate everything that is Jewish. Its people, old and young, its homes, its synagogues, its schools, its libraries, its newspapers, even its cemeteries. I, in my world, was part of the final solution. My Catholic friends was not. The difference between us was monumental and profound, even though we both suffered at the hands of the same oppressor. We, the Jewish survivors of the Holocaust, are a unique species, for we experienced a unique historical catastrophe. To equate other sad World War II or other experiences is to water down the meaning and depth of the Holocaust uniqueness and demonstrates the failure to grasp its implication of a new relationship of man to man. Finally, there's the myth that the pre-Holocaust survival techniques of Jews could save them. For centuries, Jews used tactics of assimilation, minimum visibility, lying low, not tracking the boat, and compromising with the oppressor. These philosophies and tactics that served Jewish people rather well over the centuries, and in many countries, died all in the Holocaust. They all went bankrupt. We must recognize and realize this fact. Assimilation was one system that evolved over the centuries. It started with the Age of Enlightenment, the Haskalah, and promptly turned in rather in the age of assimilation. Assimilate with your neighbors, be like them, imitate them, integrate with the Gentile majority, intermarry, adopt their customs, their traditions, and anti-Semitism will disappear forever. We shall live in peace and in harmony with the world around you. That was utopia. That was an illusion. Assimilation came to its final and formidable climax and test with the Holocaust. In 1933, when the Nazis came to power in Germany, the majority of German Jews were more and better Germans than the Christians, or so they thought. Did it save them? Did it help them? Quite the contrary. Precisely in that community where assimilation was supposed to have solved discrimination and anti-Semitism, the greatest tragedy to Judaism arose. In a country where actually a handful of Jews resided, 600,000 amid 70 million people. Yes, assimilation died in the Holocaust, hopefully never to be reborn as a philosophy for Jewish existence anywhere in the world. Another philosophy went bankrupt or died in the Holocaust, namely the Galut, or the diaspora mentality, a philosophy prevalent among East European Jews and among American Jews. When in the early stages of the Holocaust, my father confronted with it, he promptly tried to apply his old bag of experiences. After all, it worked through the ages quite well. It must work right now as well. What was that system that worked so well in the past? Negotiate and compromise with the enemy, bribe the enemy, sacrifice the few for the majority, educate your children, and wait for the oppressor to pass. My father was rather stunned and shocked. His system, proven for so many centuries, suddenly didn't work. He had no one to negotiate with. He had no one to compromise with. He had no one to bribe. He couldn't sacrifice the few, for they wanted all and everything. He saw the face of a new and vicious mankind. A mankind he did not see in thousands of years. He was stunned. He was shocked. He withdrew. He isolated himself. He could not understand why humanity had changed so radically and so rapidly. Such myths surrounding the Holocaust divide mankind and polarize it, thus denying society any chance to acknowledge the facts and proceed with common efforts to prevent a possible recurrence. The majority are unable to cope with this unique event and are simply ignoring it, pretending it was no different from any other of the numerous massacres that plagued mankind, often as a consequence of war. Long before World War II, the Nazi philosophy was clearly outlined in Hitler's Mein Kampf, fully describing the future racial division of humanity and the new Aryan society without Jews. Tragically, the world did not take this insane, deadly ideology seriously then. World War II was only the method of fulfilling some of the Holocaust's objectives and not its source or its origin. The war was the consequence of the long-range plan to restructure the human race, and not vice versa. Some argue that the Germans are a vicious, cruel people, unlike the rest of Western nations. Only they could have perpetuated such a monstrosity. Therefore, let's condemn them, and the rest of mankind is absolved. All these theories classifying the Germans as bad or good people are false. The Holocaust exposed humanity as a whole, and not just individuals, races, nationalities, or creeds. The truth has been revealed to us that the Germans, as well as all of us, Americans, Russians, Italians, Christians, or Jews, are neither good or bad. We are each of us both good and bad. We possess the passions of love as well as hate. Neither religion or formal education has prevented mankind from degeneration. Nazi Germany had one of the most advanced systems of education, with one of the most lowest illiteracy rates in the world, and the most prestigious university system. The SS, the SD, and the Gestapo counted in its ranks thousands of PhDs. The medical profession did not hesitate to support and conduct the experimentation program and the Nazi concentration camp system in which they participated fully. The Holocaust and the new Jew. True, it was we, the youngsters, the teenagers who were not as tied closely to the old traditions, who took to the streets and engaged in a hopeless militant battle, or battles. The leader of the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising, Mordechai Anielewicz, was only 23 years old. Not that we were geniuses, and my father was wrong. His system applied to a pre-Holocaust society. He was its product, the reflection of a pre-Holocaust civilization. The boys and girls who rose up to fight in the ghetto streets and in death camps and in the forests were at the beginning of a new Jew. We are the products of post-Holocaust civilization, the reflection of a new environment. Often I am asked, how come you did not embark on that mission to enlighten and educate 20 years ago? Why? Weren't you ready? And I promptly respond, I was ready. You weren't. You weren't. Your fathers and grandfathers and grandmothers, your parents and grandparents weren't ready. They did not want to listen to us survivors, to our accounts of that tragedy. They did not want to confront it. They had a feeling of guilt and shame because they and their leaders were passive and silent while their brothers and sisters were being slaughtered by the millions across the ocean. We did not see hundreds of thousands of Jews marching, screaming, demonstrating in the streets of New York or Chicago or Los Angeles. We did not see thousands fasting on the steps of the White House, trying to influence the administration, the president, perhaps to do something. Why? Did they not care? I will never be that cynical. Of course they cared. They had that diaspora mentality. They and their leadership were too timid to act boldly to be heard. Be silent, be quiet. Perhaps it won't come here. That was their mentality. Let's not awaken the Jew hater in this country. The evil perhaps won't come here. But the truth is quite the opposite. The Holocaust has taught us a lesson. The more quiet, silent, passive you are, the faster will come to your doorsteps. Yes, a new Jew was born in the Warsaw Ghetto and all the other ghettos and camps in the Holocaust. A Jew that from now on will boldly declare to his neighbors, I'm Jewish. I just as boldly declare that I'm proud of it. And the Jew will not hesitate to announce to the world around him, I shall defend it with all means at my disposal. Yes, that new Jew... Yes, that new Jew will continue to carry the book and the Torah in one hand, as he did for thousands of years. But he will not hesitate whenever necessary to carry the gun in the other hand. That type of post-Holocaust Jew is so well exemplified by the State of Israel. His is the only philosophy that fits with the post-Holocaust world and that will be respected. That new Jew is a reflection of post-Holocaust society, just as the old Jew was a reflection of the pre-Holocaust civilization. Neither one is right or wrong, nor courageous or cowardly. They are both merely the products of different ages and their respective Gentile environment. Yes, the new Jew is the reflection of a post-Holocaust society. Not that he is safer or more secure, quite opposite. I would have perhaps preferred to continue with the diaspora mentality in a pre-Holocaust society. I was equipped to deal with it. I had the experience of centuries. Then I always had a choice, and my chances to survive and flourish as a Jew, although with hardships, were rather reasonably good. I would have perhaps preferred my father's world of yesterday, the world of discrimination, to the world of annihilation, the world where I was not a hero, but a survivor. But in the post-Holocaust world, we no longer have a choice. In a world where the ideology of annihilation instead of discrimination has taken root, the century-old tactics of the diaspora will not work. Only boldness, education, enlightenment, and the willingness to fight where necessary have a chance. Yet the Jews, no matter how courageous, cannot win this struggle for survival by themselves. They constitute only a tiny fraction of humanity. Their safety in the long run lies not only in their own efforts, but even more so in the sanity, generosity, and tolerance of the rest of the world. What then can and must be done? I make no pretense about having all the answers, but would like to offer a few practical suggestions. First, we must study and understand the Holocaust thoroughly in depth, using the unique resources of the survivors. They can provide a dimension no one else can. They must also be joined by other researchers, searchers of the truth, with different perspectives and experiences. Mankind, and especially we Jews, have paid an enormous price, the lives of a third of our people. Yet we are not using that most potent weapon in our arsenal to enlighten and educate society. The Holocaust truth and knowledge of that epic is our best means to prevent a recurrence. The Holocaust is an example how a nation or nations can go insane. Often I am asked whether I am bitter or angry, or do I have difficulties to remain sane? Not at all, quite opposite. My experiences in the Holocaust have brought me closer, much closer to the human being than ever. I know better how to deal with him and what to expect of him. That's why I'm more shock-proof, more sane, more honest with myself, and a better guide if you will only listen and learn from me, the survivor, your guinea pig. To me, in particular, the Holocaust is the most far-reaching, intense teacher, a know-all, see-all, feel-all source of human behavior. I find the Holocaust represents the essence of and guide of human existence, mankind's loves, hates, beauties, and ugliness. Its past and its future are all mirrored right there, if I care and have the courage to immerse myself thoroughly and deeply. The stronger, more personal was my encounter with the kingdom of night, as Elie Wiesel calls it, the more resistant and impregnable I become to humanity's shocks. And in such a state of reason, serenity, and calm, I'm more capable of diagnosing the Holocaust truth without hate, rancor, revenge, or complexes. Only in such a state of mind can you and I diagnose our new malady and offer remedies to take steps to minimize and prevent another Holocaust. A state of being without illusions, totally realistic, yet sane enough to acknowledge insanity, to recognize its symptoms, and to work for a cure. After 30 years of silence, the survivor, with rare exceptions, has only recently begun to speak, to talk about his experiences. It is the duty and responsibility of the media, the arts, the publishing industry, historians, and society as a whole to encourage, to listen, and to record all he has to convey to us. Right after the event, most survivors were eager to tell their story, but they soon discovered in shock and disappointment that no one really cared to listen. The world was eager to forget that it ever happened. The Holocaust became the survivor's exclusive domain. Only he commemorated it, only he talked about it when with other survivors, only he recalled it in his nightmares. The subject was an embarrassing one to raise in public, or even among non-survivor friends. Consequently, the survivor withdrew into his own world of pain at first. Soon, he himself, seeing a world of indifference, indifferent during the event and indifferent after, began suppressing his past through the eagerness to build a new life, a new family, around which his own emotional world of security evolved. But for how long can he manage to bottle up within himself an experience of that magnitude? It is obvious, if the survivor is honest with himself, that now in his middle and old age, now that he has formed a new life, has accomplished and fulfilled new careers, he will and must turn his pent-up emotions loose. His suppressed secret is growing into an explosive, boiling volcano that must be unloaded, exposed for reasons of his self-therapy, as well as his obligations to society and his responsibility to his own children and grandchildren. The few Holocaust teams shown on the screen have been made without actively consulting really the survivor. In some cases, so-called Holocaust experts were consulted, but they were really expert in Jewish affairs. It is wrong to assume that an expert in Jewish studies is also one on the Holocaust. They are reluctant to confront the real issues of the Holocaust. They only feel comfortable in dealing and analyzing with raw statistics and documents. They back away from acquiring first-hand information from the survivor, those who experienced it or witnessed it. Their relationship to these primary sources of historical information is that of avoidance. Part of the fear derives from the fact that the Holocaust and the actions of the world to the Jews and the responses of the Jews do not fit into their theoretical models of explaining Jewish history. The Holocaust is a unique event, not only in world history, but just as much so in Jewish history. Every undertaking depicting the Holocaust must employ a number of eloquent survivors. Only then can one come closer to the truth. It is understandable and to be expected that with a flood of material pouring out from the survivors in the next 10 years, a certain percentage will be duplications, waste, and of inferior quality. That is unavoidable, but rather a small price we have to pay considering the value of their contributions. The real inquiry into the facts of the Holocaust, its interpretations and meaning for civilization, is actually just beginning. I'm quite certain that in 20 and 30 years hence, more will be written, argued, philosophized, more plays, lectures, motion pictures, and symposiums conducted than ever before. that is unavoidable. The coming generation's appetite to inquire, their thirst to want to know and to learn from this new pattern of human behavior will never sufficiently be satisfied. And from these dialogues, new formulas of prevention will be attempted by Jew and Gentile. Whether they will be successful is not for us to speculate, but we survivors have the obligation to assist. Above all, the witnesses must set the record straight, and before we pass on, make certain that mankind has established the right and true diagnosis of what happened. That is the minimum legacy for us to hand over to the next generation. The second most pressing endeavor is to establish Holocaust centers of study in every university and college across this land and in other countries. This will enable the training of thousands of qualified instructors who can teach the story of the Holocaust and its lessons to the millions of young boys and girls during their formative years. These centers must develop full academic programs, including master's and PhD degrees, a serious and comprehensive science of the subject. This would encourage thousands of young academicians to seek careers in the field of human survival. The last and most important aspect of prevention is to inaugurate a comprehensive courses on the Holocaust in all high schools, so that our youth may fully acquaint itself with humanity's weaknesses and strengths. The young must spend several hours weekly in absorbing the possible dangers of hate, genocide, and mass insanity. These precious hours of study of the Holocaust will counter the negative influence from the adult world outside, the already poisoned environment offered to the young. On a recent lecture in a leading high school right here in Manhattan, Stuyvesant High School, I stunned the crowd of kids in the auditorium when I picked out a neat, bright-looking 16-year-old student as the future barbarian. In 10 years from now, you may be a professional killer of infants, children, and old people. I pointed at this innocent-looking boy who reacted in bewildered disbelief, considering it a clumsy joke. It's unbelievable, impossible, ridiculous. Is that what you think? Now imagine the year is 1930 and not 1982. And the place is Berlin and not Manhattan. And I'm addressing a hall full of German students your age, just as clean, neat, bright, and intelligent looking as you. Well, 16-year-old Hans is reacting the same way as you do to my suggestion that he may become in 10 years a barbarian, a commander of a death factory. I assure you, his disbelief would have been as genuine as yours, as that boy in Manhattan. The Holocaust reveals to us that none of us is exempt from mass madness. The place and time to prevent the affliction is in the high school or even earlier. For we can innocently be captured by evil and then slowly progress in the participation in cruelties until it becomes mechanical, scientific. Then we can justify it with confused morality or insane idealism to satisfy our conscience. The germs of a new Holocaust have been spread like seeds in the wind. We must spare no effort to build healthy, sane societies resistant to this deadly disease, which can threaten whole people, the whole world. The Jews, the first victims, the traditional scapegoats, and the most threatened, have the most direct and immediate interest in a world of sanity, tolerance, and generosity, essential for their survival. That's why they first have to be attuned to these truths and lessons of the Holocaust. Edmund Burke stated, the only thing necessary For the triumph of evil is for sane men to do nothing. The Baal Shem Tov, the founder of Hasidism, phrased it more philosophically. Remembrance is the secret of redemption. Thank you.